All right. Perfect. Well, hello everyone. Welcome to the Public Legal Education Association of Canada, or PLEAC's Virtual Fair, where we explore several sessions on various topics, beginning today until Thursday this week. Today, you're joining us for day one, so welcome. My name is Hannah Holmes. I am the program director with PLEAC, and it's wonderful to have all of you here today as we come together to share knowledge and ideas, and in particular today, explore the question, digital first or people first? How does the digital divide affect public legal education work? So before we begin, I do want to acknowledge that while we are meeting virtually from across the country, I am joining you from Toronto, Ontario, which is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. This land has been home to diverse Indigenous nations for thousands of years and remains home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people today. As an organization committed to justice and education, we recognize the ongoing impacts of colonization and affirm our responsibility to work toward truth, reconciliation, and meaningful action. This virtual fair is a 3-day event. We have 2 sessions each day. Between sessions, there will be a 30-minute break from roughly 1:15 to 1:45 p.m., and that's Eastern Standard Time. I know we have folks joining from across the country today. But this is just going to give everyone a chance to step away, reflect, or connect informally before the next or second session of the day begins. So we do encourage everyone to use the chat and Q&A functions throughout the event to share comments, ask questions, engage with one another. We will also, though, have 15 minutes at the end for a Q&A as well to answer any specific questions that you may have for our wonderful presenter today. So most sessions will have a dedicated moderator to help guide the discussion, and we are incredibly grateful to all of our moderators, our panelists, and our participants for making this event possible. So finally, please don't forget to answer the survey at the end of each session. You'll see it pop up, and it might also show up in an email to sort of poke you, just to obviously collect any feedback that you might have. We're always looking to improve our future events, so please feel free to do so. And then to all of you, thank you for being here. Thank you for your engagement, for the important work that you all do in your communities. We're really looking forward to a great event. So thank you so much. So with that, I'd like to introduce our first session titled Reflections on Engaging with the Digital Divide. I am delighted to introduce our speaker, Matthias Sturm, PhD candidate, researcher, evaluator, whose work includes looking at the intersections of digital technologies and adult education with a focus on digital equity. And much more, but I'll leave that to Matthias. So we are also today joined by Julie Matthews, who you can see here, public legal education researcher, to collaborate with us today during our Q&A session, or part of our session today as well. So for now, Matthias will be taking the lead. So Matthias, over to you.
Thank you, Hannah, and thank you, Julie, for inviting me to the PLEAC Virtual Fair. Welcome to my kitchen. There's a chalkboard there in the back that I'll be using a little bit in the presentation to mix it up a little bit so it's not only digital, but it's in a digital space. And my kitchen is a digital space, and I will talk about that a little bit more in a moment. So yes, Hannah, already you said, obviously I wear a lot of different hats, and that'll come out during the presentation. So let's get started, and let's share the presentation and go to the slideshow. Is that okay, Hannah? Can you see it? Perfect. Okay. So yes, I do love the title. The title is not mine, but I'll take it on. That's fantastic. And today, what we're going to do today is quite a few things. We kind of section it off so it doesn't get a little bit too overwhelming. We'll do some polls and some surveys between the sections, but also in the different segments, we have some activities as well. So in the first segment, we'll talk a little bit about equality versus equity and why the distinction is important for inclusion and social justice. You've probably heard about that, but we'll dive into that a little bit deeper. Then we'll do a few polls. What do you think about digital access? Different ideas about that, and those polls will relate to the second segment, to the stats from research about adult skills and research directly done with adult learners that I've been involved in. Then after the second segment, we'll do another short survey and use also what we've looked at in a little bit more detail in the second segment to think about the people you work with, the clients of the organizations that you work for. I know there's a lot of people in the room, so I imagine there's a lot of diversity. So it'd be great if you also contribute in the chat and share your thoughts and stuff like that. And then we'll close out with a little bit of storytelling. The storytelling, I think, is a very good way to talk about this issue, and that there's different ways to go about it. And we'll do that, and then end up with a little bit of brainstorming and the Q&A. And throughout it, please feel free to put your questions in the chat. We will address them in the end. Hannah and Julie are going to be assisting me with that to have a look at the chat, which is great. And so I'm grateful for that assistance. Okay, so let's start right off with a poll. And yeah, if you can, thank you, Hannah, if you can use the poll. So if you could all participate in that, that'd be great. There's 5 options there. And the options are: I'm using a desktop computer, I'm using a laptop computer, I'm using a tablet or a smartphone. And Zoom, you can call in on the telephone. Maybe you're using a telephone. Or maybe none of the above applies. I'll give you a couple more seconds. That's a pretty straightforward poll. I don't think we need too much time. And then maybe, Hannah, you can see how many people are voted and then close it out, and we're getting to a good percentage of responses. And then we can see what happens there. Excellent. So yes. So I guess some of you must be thinking there's something wrong with this question, and I think you're perfectly right. There's something fundamentally wrong with my methodology and the question. The last 2 answer choices are hardly fair, are they? There's one response for calling from a telephone. I'd be very interested how you figure that out. Maybe you had Zoom open at the same time as you calling on the telephone. But the point is of this poll is to see if there's an issue about digital access and equity. How can participants on the phone or without access answer this poll at all, right? Do you maybe think this issue will eventually solve itself when everyone is connected and has devices to connect? Thanks, Hannah, if you don't mind closing the poll, that's great. Or is it a wicked problem? Well, a wicked problem is a problem that has no single solution. It also has a social complexity with many interdependencies, and it has no stopping point. It's commonly used in public policy, and to call something a wicked problem means that stakeholders disagree on the nature of the problem and the best way to solve it. I think that digital equity issues are wicked problems. But even if they cannot be solved easily, it doesn't mean that we can't do anything about it. And we'll get to that a little bit later. So let's look at equality versus equity. I'm sure that some of you have seen this kind of infographic before, or versions of it. This one is from the Status of Women Canada website. It suggests that we should be striving for equity so that everybody can see across the barrier or the fence. But I'm wondering, does providing boxes, and more than one box, does providing boxes or other kind of supports really create equity? There's other graphics that extend this graphic that suggests that the barriers need to be removed for liberation and social justice to happen. But let's look first at how equality is different from equity. I think that's always important to remind us and to dive in a little bit more. And I don't mind going to do a quick trip to Wikipedia. That's what I got from reading what it says there. Equality of opportunity is a central aim of liberalism. While socialism strives for equality of outcomes, liberals demand equal conditions and chances at the start. So that means that liberalism is based on the idea that there is no structural or interactional discrimination that influences the competition between people. In education, that's the sector that I work in, that is, and many of us are familiar with that, that is that door that is wide open, but people have to make sure they walk through it themselves. At least that's in theory. So, in short, equal opportunity is central to the concept of mediocrity, which is a central aim of liberalism. So, in other words, in liberalism, and let's go back to the graphic that we saw before, we are expected to do it ourselves, or that means, and I do know I'm a little bit cynical here, that we all better bring our own boxes to stand on. If I got this right, in liberalism, we use the concept of equity to achieve the starting conditions for equality of opportunity. But I'm wondering if that works. Um, I think additional supports are needed to ensure equity and equality of opportunity to achieve equitable outcomes, to get to this liberation, social justice kind of idea. Um, but can that be achieved by simply removing barriers? I don't know. Or do we need to adopt universal design concepts everywhere in our lives? And what if these are at the expense of others who do not see or experience these barriers? And what does that mean for the spaces that we live in that become more and more digital? So lots of questions in my mind, and I'm sure in yours too. Um, so let's take a little bit of another trip down memory lane and try to figure some of this out together the best way we can. Maybe you remember the information highway. That's a long time ago. But let me read what it says here. It might be a little bit too small. The internet this was in 1994, so I apologize. The internet, man's largest computer network, contains software treasures beyond your wildest dreams. Internet access CD-ROMs, what are those? I forget. CD-ROMs teaches you the way to explore this fascinating worldwide software library. This invaluable collection contains the listing and software packages that will get you started and keep you rolling down the information highway. Very exciting. Um, this is also the time referred to as the digital turn. The digital turn refers to the rapid digitization of literacy practices. But what if the digital turn, what if it's a digital turn only? Now, this sign originally read right turn only. I'm sure you've guessed that. I changed it to illustrate how living in digital spaces affects our digitality. And digitality is a term that refers to the way we live in a digital society. So sort of our humanity in digital spaces. Um, I find it compelling to imagine what one would do when faced with a stop sign that reads digital turn only. Can I make this turn only if I have a digital vehicle? Or what do I do if I have an old car? Am I stuck here? Like, where am I going to go? But of course, that's not what digital turn means. But it's about living in digital spaces, even outside our online activities. The demands placed on us in a digital society show that moving ahead digitally is very complex and even more so without the means to do so. These complexities cannot be solved by just creating infrastructure for everyone to access the internet, and they influence our digitality deeply. And again, that's the way we live in these digital spaces. Now, let's do some drawing. Um, just take a minute maybe to find a piece of paper while uh, I'll move to this chalkboard there, and a pen or a pencil or color crayons, if you like. I will ask you to draw along with me while I try to tell you a little bit more about living in digital spaces. And let's call this our digital journey. I will stop to share so you can see the full screen and then come back after this. Okay, so we're gonna draw on the board. Here I am. I'm gonna step in a little bit. We're gonna draw on your piece of paper or a napkin or whatever you have, the three levels of the digital divide. And think about it while we do this. So let's start with the first divide. You can draw it on the bottom of your paper and label it connection. Start like this. Let's think about what connection means to you and your clients. It can refer to your internet connectivity, like broadband, smartphone data plans. And I can see I'm a little bit out of the screen, so let me turn my computer a little bit. Hopefully that works better. There we go. Okay. All right. I gotta look at my notes as well. It can it can be the internet connectivity, public Wi-Fi, or bring your own access in community spaces, for example. It can refer to your location. Is it rural or how does the end go? Is it rural or urban? Is it rural or urban? Is it, are you living in a low income or a high income neighborhood or a racialized community? Do you have a quiet or a noisy space where you connect? Is it your own space you can use whenever you want, or is it a space that's shared with others? And it's about your digital device. If you have a new device, an old device, you have to share it with other people. Can it connection? Can it install new apps easily? The new versions of the apps that you need to to do things. What else maybe? Or using a public computer or a computer that's loaned to you. Feel free to make notes on your paper too, or put them in the chat or whatever you like, whatever comes up. So the first level is connection. Let's do the second level. And I should be drawing it more in an arch so it becomes like a Wi-Fi symbol. I didn't really do that well. Doing that, let's call the second one activity. And by activity, I mean the way we use it, the way we use the internet. So ask yourself or think about your clients. When are you using the device to access the internet? Is it anytime you want or how long you want? What does it mean for the quantity or the quality of your online activities? If you have internet access all the time, and an adequate device to use it at home, at work, at a community center, or even in transit. What would it mean for how often or how well you use the internet if you had limited access and a device that was not adequate or that you had to share with somebody else? And maybe you had to use the internet in a space that was not private or safe. How does activity, how does your internet activity determine activity? Yeah, activity. There we go. how does your how does it determine your internet activity? How does your seamless limited access determine how we interact and how we transact online? Or social media, for example, or doing online banking. Are you spending more time using social media on your phone or using office software on your computer? And I'm asking that because social media use correlates with people with less digital access, but using office software doesn't. And something like Word is part of almost every job description, but social media is not. So let's look at the third divide, and let's call that benefits. Or you could call it outcomes. Oh, that looks more like an H, but that's okay. And then maybe ask yourself, what are the benefits when you're able to leverage your internet access and the use of your digital device into some tangible outcome? For example, I can complete an online form, hit the submit button, do that quite easily because I have everything here in my kitchen. Um, but that wouldn't be the case if I hadn't. And especially if I had to, um, for example, worry that I run out of time using a computer in a public library or being asked to leave using Wi-Fi at a coffee shop for too long. And ask yourself how your clients are affected. Have you heard anything about any challenges to pay for internet access or devices to use it? How about getting enough time on computers at home that are shared with the entire family? And sometimes children doing their homework or participating in school. Um, so the third level benefits. I'm doing very bad with the arch. And now I'm running out of room. Okay. You probably did a lot better there. There we go. And that was supposed to be an arch. Okay. Let me share my screen again. All right, so we drew the three, and thank you for participating in the activity and for posting in the chat. I hope that was a little bit of fun. And I think that drawing the digital divides as a Wi-Fi symbol, which I did a bad job in doing, is a good way to remember its elements and maybe also easier to explain to somebody else. You could easily use a napkin at a coffee shop and explain it to a colleague and friend during discussions about when the digital divide comes up or anything like that that makes you think of that. The first three levels of the digital divide is where we can have agency. That's at least what the theory says. I think, and I think my experience is too, and maybe much of yours as well. I think we want our clients to have agency so that they feel and know that they can do things and progress and improve, especially in a society that has become more digital. And here's just a little bit of theory that we already touched on in our artwork. When we actively access and use technologies in the first three levels of the digital divide, and I'm saying the first three levels because there's talk about more levels like the automation and the use of algorithms and stuff like that. But it's really the first three where Van Dijk says we can have agencies. And Van Dijk says we should look at the entire range of position we find ourselves in and how we can exercise that agency. Miller and Bartlett argue that we are more likely to develop digital fluency with regular and reliable access to the internet. And digital fluency means that having digital literacy skills or learning them is not enough. we also need many opportunities to use them and become confident using them. A little bit like learning a language, learning how to ride a bike, what have you. In theory, but I think also in practice, digital fluency contributes to what Bourdieu calls cultural and social capital. Maybe you're familiar with that. That is, in this case, the digital literacy practices we learn, put to work, and benefit from in digital spaces, and how we build and use social networks to our advantage. Also, very important too. Um, I like to think of the levels of the digital divide more as layers because when I think of adults, I think people do not progress from one level to another. Adults know how to do many things, but they may have to fill in some gaps. It's important that we recognize what adults bring to the table. I also think that the depiction of the layers as a Wi-Fi symbol makes it clearer that that my connection, for example, and activities online can have an exponential impact, not only in my digital space, but also in real life, like a Wi-Fi connection. The further away, you know. Um, Connecting these theories means that online activities can be capital enhancing activities if they positively correlate with your client's cultural or social capital or our own. Or in other words, your client's digital literacy practices can be a sort of techno capital. Let's do another poll, and I'm sure Hannah is ready. So there's three polls here. And the first one is about how Canada ranks with respect to the skills of adults 16 years and older. This is from the most recent adult skills survey. And what do you think? Does Canada rank in the top 5 countries? So those are not only digital skills, it's also numeracy, literacy mostly, and problem solving. Um, Top 5 countries, better than average, worse than average, bottom 5 countries. You can also share your thoughts in the chat while you do these polls. And then we'll review some research that relates to these polls afterwards. So let's see about this one. Top 5, but most of them better than average, worse than average, no bottom 5. Okay, let's try to remember this when we get there. The second one is about what newcomers say about their difficulties using technologies. What do newcomers say? Newcomer language learners, I should have said, say about tech barriers. Do they mostly say it's the internet issues that bothers them? Is it a lack of devices? Do they have issues with reading or language, or what is on their mind when they are asked this question? What do you think? And you can choose more than one here. And the learners who answered this question were able to choose more than one as well. Good. Whenever you think Hannah is a good, you can probably see the response rate. Ooh, that is very interesting. Pretty much across the board, but the improved language is interesting stat. So we'll get back to that. Excellent. Thank you so much. And the last one is about how adults in basic education and English language programs connect. What do you think? Do the following issues apply to ABE and ESL learners? That they're using more smartphones, that they're using less home internet than before, that they have mobile data limits, or that they share a device, or nothing at all, or all of them, whatever you think. And then we'll look at some stats and see about that. How is it looking, Hannah? Hmm, also very interesting. Excellent. Thank you, Hannah. So please remember your own answer to these polls, and then we'll, yeah. There we go. Okay. Could move the slide there for a second. All right, let's do some background. Let's get to some background research that relates to the questions in the polls. First up, the International Adult Skills Surveys. Those assess the proficiency of adult populations older than 16 years in literacy and numeracy, and some of them also in problem-solving areas in industrialized countries. It's done about every 10 years by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development and Statistics Canada for the Canadian portion. There was an international adult literacy survey called IELTS that was between 94 and 98. Then one that was called Adult Literacy and Life Skills Survey, or all 2003 to 2007. And then the newest two iterations of the Survey of Adult Skills, which is called PLEAC, which is a long thing, Program of International Adult something competencies, which were administered in 2012 and 2022, and the most recent results were released in the fall of 2024. So that's pretty fresh. The Canadian sample size was close to 11,700 adults, and that is a sample size that's bigger than other countries that usually average between 5,000 and 6,000 adults. The reason why that is because to get enough data for the province level, so there is an interest of Statistic Canada's for each province to get enough data for each province. What's important, or what I like to point out, there's lots in this survey, and it's also somewhat controversial. But one of the things that stood out in 2012 is that although Canada has, and in 2012 they had the problem solving, and they did it in the tech environment called PSTRE, problem solving in technology-rich environment. And Canada had a good average, but when you drill down, it also had the largest proficiency gap in this area. So it had they had a lot of people at the top who were very good, who assessed very well, and with a very high proficiency, and a lot at the bottom, which the average didn't reveal. Now in 2022, in the new one, they didn't repeat this. They did a new thing called adaptive problem solving. So unfortunately, we cannot compare. So it might be still at that level of 2012. We don't know. In 2022, the average proficiency of Canadians aged 16 to 65 remained stable in literacy and improved in numeracy. Also, in the last one, Canada's average skill levels are higher among the 25 to 34-year-old group and lower for the 55 to 64-year-olds. And Canada ranks, that was one of the questions, ranks 10th out of 31 countries, and that's slightly above average. Generally, the northern countries, the Scandinavian countries rank very high, and the big industrialized countries like United States, Germany, France rank lower than Canada. So not bad, but it could be better. So yes, so one of my hats is in adult basic education and settlement language programs that I work in the LINK program. That's maybe some of you are familiar with. It's the Language Instruction for Newcomers to Canada program. I work for a not-for-profit that provides a learning management system with Canadian content and training for LINK teachers, and to use that in a blended and online environment. We do a lot of evaluation there, a lot of research, also with learners, mostly with the teachers, but also with the learners. And here are a few findings from my research. 9 out of 10 find technology very or sometimes helpful to connect to other newcomers about their settlement. 9 out of 10 find video and audio most helpful to learn, and not text. Or when asked about barriers to use tech, if you remember that question from the poll, 5 out of 10 said that they needed to improve their reading and six out of five said they needed to improve their English. That doesn't mean that they didn't vote for problems with technology, for tech-related problems. But what was most on their mind was that tech issues weren't preventing them from participating. It was their level of reading and their level of language that they needed to improve to participate. So I think that's quite telling. Now, I also work usually on an annual report this time of the year about digital learning in adult education for the Department of Education in California. And that's interesting because we do a lot of surveying of the learners there. So I wanted to throw this in, and I think it's representative. The adult basic education program there includes literacy, high school equivalency, and second language programs. So it's not two divided sectors like it is in Canada. So here are some stats that have been getting worse and not better in the last years. 1 in 5 learners have a cap on their data plan. Less learners use a computer or tablet. The same number use smartphones, but more learners do not have a device. Between 3 and 4 out of 10 learners have to share their device. So these are stats that have been every year since the pandemic have been getting worse. So what does it mean to live in digital spaces with seamless or limited access? Here are a few more relevant stats that we didn't cover before, but I think that need to be mentioned. According to the 2020 Canadian Internet Use Survey, this is a survey that's part of the Federal Household Survey that's supposed to be representative of all Canadians. 27% of respondents use the internet 20 hours or more per week. That's 80 hours per month or more. But 45% use the internet 10 hours or less per week. So only 40 hours a month or less. And here's another statistic published by the Toronto Star. In 2018, the average reported price for internet service was $80.31 per month. That's according to the Canadian Radio and Television Commission Monitoring Report. In 2022, the average cost of the internet in Canada has risen to $95 per month. So that's an 80.5 increase in 4 years.
Matthias, just a quick question in the chat for your previous slide. I think that was slide 10. Just curious. I think it was about the stat, I think the one just before that slide.
Yeah.
Someone's asking about, yeah, so the last line, 6 out of 5 of their English. They're asking, is it 5 out of 6, or is it in terms of that stat at the bottom there?
Oh, hang on. That might be a typo. Yes. Good eye. Hang on. Yeah, that's a typo. So it's 6 out of 10.
6 out of 10. Okay, thank
I'm
you.
sorry. That is a good stat. Great. Where was I? Here. Yes. Thank you. So let's visualize what some of this means for everyday seamless or limited access. Everyday seamless access means that people have more devices and the resources to pay for them, are nearly 4 times as likely to use the internet for personal use from work, and can be responsive and efficient quicker. Everyday limited access means people are more dependent on public access in libraries and public spaces, that they often use pay-as-you-go cell phone data plans that are cheaper to purchase, but more costly per minute, and that they spend, and this is, I think, very important, that they spend a higher percentage of their budget on communications and sacrifice other basic needs to pay for them, particularly if they have school-age children. So if they have with the stats that when people have tight budgets, that often they pay for the internet before paying for food, for example. So let's do another survey, and this I'm hoping helps a little bit, relates to the research again, but I'm hope it helps a little bit to think about the digital challenges of your clients, and that it could be part of, it could be a starting list of things maybe to create some kind of profiles of your clients to address digital inequities. You know your clients best, or maybe there's an opportunity to develop a survey or do a survey and find out about what your client's circumstances are. So, for example, do they have limited or no internet access at home and have to rely on public Wi-Fi? Do they have a mobile data limit or and use pay-as-you-go cell phone plans like we've heard? Do they spend a higher percentage of their budget on communication? Would they be better served with mobile-friendly form-filling formats instead of PDF forms that we get sent all the time, but are really hard to fill out on a cell phone, let alone if you don't have all the equipment to print it, scan it, or whatever. Maybe there's need for digital skills training and support using technology, or there's a need for access to current and affordable devices if they don't, or a lot of other things. So feel free to share responses or chat them down, write them down somewhere, and then we can bring them up during the Q&A. You can put them in the chat then too. How about it, Hannah? Is there a good amount of responses that came in?
Yeah, just waiting for a few more, and there's a few comments in the chat as well. So I'll just wait.
Fantastic. Excellent. Excellent. Thanks everybody for doing that. I know it's a lot of stats, and but hopefully that's a little bit easier to digest this way and relate to. Wow. Okay. 78. Limited or no internet access at home. We use public Wi-Fi. Wow. 63%. Yep. The mobile-friendly form filling formats. Yes, that would help. Pretty high, everything. Thanks, Hannah. Thanks, everybody. Move to the next. Okay, so I said we're going to take it easier, right? Let's watch. I hope I check the sound button. Otherwise, I have to share and reshare. Let's watch a short clip about needing help with filling out online forms from the film I, Danielle Blake. If we have time at the end, if you haven't seen the film, we can also watch the movie trailer, or you can find it on YouTube. It's a film worth watching. I think it's now 10 years old, but it does relate, and it's set in Great Britain. But Great Britain has a similar, in this respect, a similar system as Canada does. So it's an interesting take. If the clip doesn't play, maybe Hannah can put the link in the chat. So you could also, or if you're on a slower bandwidth, let's hope it works. Let's play this thing.
I think it needs, yeah, I'm not hearing the sound on that one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry about that. I thought I did.
Maybe it should be just a little louder, but yeah, let's give it a shot.
Up to, yeah. Oh, yeah. I did not click it. Okay. And play from current slide. Let's try this again.
Do you have a partner?
No, she's passed away.
I'm really sorry to hear that.
Thank you.
Do you have any dependent children aged under 20 living with you?
No, I don't.
It's really important we get this filled in because we need to get the process started.
Yeah.
Excuse me, Anne. Can I have a word, please?
Could you just give me 30 seconds, please? We're just
Well,
getting
actually,
to...
can I have a word now in my office? Thank you.
Right.
Jesus, I've got into trouble now. I'm really sorry.
It's me that should be sorry. You just carry on, you're doing good.
You know, Anne, we've spoke about this before. That isn't acceptable.
I think in this case it's quite reasonable
The
because...
thing is, you set the precedence. It's not acceptable.
Okay. Yes. So, are our digital lives only, I'm asking, in digital spaces, or do these intersect with our lives? And how does that happen? We've just seen this clip. And I've alluded to this thinking about digital spaces a little bit before. I went to a Life Labs recently and recalled that I saw signs like this one pop up during the pandemic. The lineups have gone, but the practice of online appointment bookings has not changed. The sign then in the pandemic, and I think this was in Lindsay, Ontario, the sign read at the time, "Please wait here, I will be right back." And below that it reads, "If you have an appointment or SMS, stay here. Walk-ins, line up out back." So let's have a look who is lining up out back. And the next time you are at a Life Labs, or I think only in Ontario they're called Life Labs, but there's basically where you do a blood collection to get it to your doctor, to the lab and then to your doctor. Look around who is in the waiting room and who waits and for how long, or at any doctor that has online appointments or whatever. Who doesn't have an appointment? Is it seniors, maybe people with disabilities, racialized people without digital access for sure, because they're waiting there while other people whiz by and don't have to wait that long. This is what online first access does to people, like in this picture. If you see who's lining up there, somebody in the wheelchair, somebody who's always an elderly person, but you tell me. So this is what online first access does to people when you have to make an online appointment first or experience real disadvantages if you can't. And in the pandemic, then often when they opened up the waiting room again, the most vulnerable were sitting there for 45 minutes waiting for an appointment. I thought anyways. If you want, in the chat, you can post some examples of similar experience that maybe you or your clients had. And we'll move on to review quickly. Maybe that digital divide is easier to remember this way. You remember connection or simply how you get connected. Activity or how much you use the connection regularly, or the benefits and outcomes so that you obtain what you need during these activities. So keep those in mind. Another way to visualize the way people experience digital spaces is through storytelling. This is a screenshot of two stories. I know it'd be hard to read, so maybe Hannah can put the link to it in the chat. There's two stories side by side of a day in the life of someone with seamless access and someone with limited access that I came up with a colleague of mine during my research. You can open the image using the link and then zoom in to read the stories at your leisure. They're part of a research brief about the digital divide, and the stories are in the center of the PDF. Thank you, Hannah. There's also a number, several reports out there. This is one example. Reports about digital access issues in different sectors. And maybe there is one in the sector that you work in, or maybe one could be done. maybe a few not-for-profits that you work for together. In 2020, this report was done by the Systemic Issues and Social Change Working Group in Toronto. There's lots of information about the experience of service providers during the beginning of the pandemic in there, for example, about barriers like the lack of reliable and sufficient internet, not enough technology devices for family members, cost of technology devices and the internet, the quality of devices clients had, and much more. And I know there's lots of this slide too. I think we're sharing, Hannah is going to share the slide deck later on, so you don't have to worry. And I think it's a good time to start talking about digital equity and public legal education work. This is not my area, but I hope I've maybe gave some food for thought. There is things that can be done to support users, strategies can be developed that target the resourcefulness of users. I've talked a little bit about how people have some expertise in some areas and some not, that it's not necessarily this level of thing that you have to go through. There's a lot of peer support that often adults can lend to each other, and distributed expertise in this peer group that maybe you have with the clients that you're working with, and providing alternative options. The mobile-friendly forums, for example, is one of them, but also a paper option. We shouldn't discount paper options if that's a possibility to still do, or anything else that you can think of. And there's also intervention opportunities on the level of the support organizations that maybe you work with, and personal support that's often adults get in their family with their friends, but are sometimes shy to ask, sometimes shy to reveal. It's also stigmatizing, like regular literacy issues can be. The more we expect people to be digitally savvy, the harder maybe it is for many people to say that there's issues there, and we all do have issues. I didn't click the sound button. And institutional support from your own organizations. What is the kind of interventions that you can do? So please use the chat to brainstorm and share ideas, and that's what it's for. And I thank you for your time. I hope there was lots of food for thought, like I said, and it wasn't too dry. And I'll let's have a look what's in the chats, Hannah.
Awesome, sounds great. And in my opinion, not dry at all. That was wonderful. Yeah, we had a little bit of interaction here in the chat, and also feel free everyone to chime in with more questions, brainstorming, and Q&A. Feel free to do so as well. Julie and I will take a look, as well as Matthias. And yeah, I've shared all the links to some of those sources there that Matthias was sharing, which is wonderful. And of course, we'll share the slide deck after as well for everybody. But yeah, if we want to go back here, we had some feedback, Matthias, about sort of one of the previous sort of polls or slides that we had. You know, folks are saying low literacy English skills is a major barrier. We work with incarcerated folks trying to ensure there's access to legal information, but prisons in Canada do not allow internet access.
Yeah.
Access to a phone or computer before any conversation about Wi-Fi or data, which was a common response that we saw as well. We have analytical data about what devices our clients are using, but obviously no data about the problems faced by people who can not access our materials.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the issues with incarcerated clients is a problem. There's also that distinction between the jails and the which is a very transient community. I think we've worked with a few people in Toronto. I know one or two places that literacy programs that work uh, with adults in jail, but it's problematic because there's no consistency. There's no yeah. It's very problematic. I do know that in California there's a lot of programs that have jail programs, so they but I've never looked into how they actually deal with the internet issue there. But I should ask
Mhm.
um, because there's more. It doesn't seem to be such a big barrier there than it is here, but it certainly is here. I've heard that many times.
Yeah. And we have, I see in terms of the brainstorming, we have a comment on, in-person sessions, videos to walk people through usage of an interactive website.
Uh-huh. Yeah,
We have, yeah, I live in a low income building where we have some seniors who are not trained to use computers and are uncomfortable with modern technology. Some are new to this country and English is not their first language. I'm a tenant leader and would like to help.
that's great. Yeah. So there's also a start there, getting to know your clients. I think that's hugely important. Doing this, there's a lot of cookie cutter solutions out there, and the first one being universal access, and that magically would then solve the problem if just everybody would be connected. And that certainly is an issue for many rural places in Canada, even urban places, where the internet is not that great or where it's just not affordable. But there's so much more to it, and I think knowing your client base is really the first step to know. There's no point spending your time or spending your funds on things that doesn't help your clients. And so you need to know what really is needed.
I see. Yeah, I don't, there's a question from a staff here. Could you please speak to intervention opportunities again if we have some time? Internet was unfortunately a bit flaky at that slide. Yeah, as this happens.
Yes. And thank you. I saw moved a little. I can go back in the chat. That's probably was going to take too long, but I did see Georgina's message there, and yes, I will connect MTL and MTML. That's a great umbrella group in the literacy sector. Fantastic. In Toronto. Yes, the side-by-side stories I think work really well, and I can say that this is the idea came about. There is and I'm sure it's not the only one, but in the uh, in the Vancouver, the digital strategy document of the city of Vancouver, I think in 2013, there was a graphic that showed an idealized digital citizen, a day in the life of a digital citizen of Vancouver, the way that people imagined it who drew up this document. And it was somebody with very seamless access, somebody who went to work, who, whatever, renewed their license plate on the SkyTrain, something like that, right? Which is great. I'm sure people do it, right? But that's what got us thinking about well, what would this look like if I don't have all these things, right? And I just had moved to Vancouver, starting my PhD, and even with enough skills but the lack of access, even then, like sometimes I myself was running around trying to print out a form, fill out a form, print it out, sign it because it couldn't be digitally signed. Go to and then it was during the pandemic, so I couldn't go to the university to print it out. I had to go to Office Depot or something like that. The clock was ticking, nothing worked. Had to print it out, sign it, put it on the scanner, and do all these things, right? And yeah, it would literally take you the whole day to do it, right? So and you know, I had better things to do, and I'm sure plenty of other people had better things to do than spending a day trying to sign a document, right? Yeah. So and that's kind of where this came from. So to imagine um, what would it be like if I didn't have a printer at home, if I couldn't scan a form, if I couldn't do all these things, what would my day be like? And we did interviews also with and it's not only based on this kind of idea, it's also based on literature and interviews with learners, what they actually experienced.
And a couple of people spoke about this already, but the participants on today's webinar, do people have strategies that they use to support people with various digital barriers, various obstacles to digital use that you could share? A couple of people already did, but wondering about that.
Thank you, Julie. Yeah, I think that's there's also a huge need, I think, for organizations to come together. It's not a cookie cutter thing, but sharing strategies and sharing experience, I think, is very, very important and very valuable. There's no point everybody reinventing the wheel, just as much as there's no point for everybody doing the same thing. And so, yeah, so I think those knowing your target population and client profiles and stuff like that is very important, and sharing strategies, like you said.
Yeah.
These days, one requires a printer simply to manage their healthcare in terms of going for blood work at the basic level without a family doctor. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
So my guess is a lot of community organizations then probably make available a printer, have a printer available for clients to use, which is something very practical that can help. Anything else?
That's a good idea. Yeah, for example, when I go to my family doctor, which is the Toronto Western Hospital Family Clinic, so it's a big place. They do workshops because they have an online booking system and videos and stuff like that. But they also, I've never been to one, but I also saw that they provide in-person workshops for people to get used to the online booking system, which is a little bit onerous. But it is what it is. We're in downtown Ottawa and live in a building managed by Ottawa Community Housing. Yes, I'm sure there's lots of okay. Yes. Yes. Absolutely. Resources require money. And unfortunately, we live at a time where it's all about efficiency and kind of thing. But I think the more we talk about it, the word also goes out that it is in the interest of everybody. Like going back to the very beginning, the survey activity, right? The very first poll. If you only, even as a business, if you're only serving people who can fill out an online survey, you're not serving your customer base. You're obviously not. And there's good examples. One is Hydro BC that I've heard of, which is a few years ago now, but where people basically were invited with a letter to fill out an online survey, but some people ask somebody to print out the survey, filled it out, and send it in by mail. But the company that was in charge of the data collection and the analysis, of course, an outsourced company and probably the cheapest from three kind of thing, had no budget for manual data entry. So those surveys all went, assumingly, went the garbage. So what does that say about the survey results? So I think we also need to think about it that way, that it's not just an equity thing. It's just a good investment, good business practice if you're really interested to know what your clients are, if you really want to reach all your client base. Yes, each time something needs to be printed, one must walk a fair distance to pay a place like Staples to print for them. Yes.
Yeah, I see another comment here. A problem we face in the plea world is that the information we're providing is sometimes complex and may have been prepared by outside legal experts. So it's challenging to provide real-time help.
Yeah. Like I said, wicked problem. There's no one solution. There's so many issues that come from every different direction. But that doesn't mean we can't chip away at it. And I think it's that chipping away that makes it that that makes it more livable. Um, if it's supports that need to be provided, if people are left to their own devices, it's just not acceptable.
Yeah. And to Julie's question here at the end as well, I see some comments in terms of strategies to support people who face various digital obstacles. I see here years ago we got funding to put computers in common space in the women's shelters, also did some testing and using them to access the internet. And we also have specific topic websites that are supported by direct email lines as well.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's great. It's all it's all good stuff.
Yeah. Mm.
Yeah.
Oh, Julie, you're on mute.
Yeah. Lois, on that one, do you still, do the computers continue to exist in the women's shelters? Just wondering, because sometimes you get funding to put them in initially, and then it's sort of over time, they may not remain. Just wondering about that if you're online still.
The lack of funding for maintenance is an issue, and also there's been a decline in loaner programs, for example, since the pandemic, post-pandemic, because maybe it was financed by special funding, or maybe people think it's not needed anymore.
Interesting. I know we have a few minutes left. Feel free, folks, to continue to sort of add a few sort of other ideas and brainstorm some more in the chat here. I'm curious to follow up, Matthias, about sort of one of the survey questions you did about sort of how Canada ranks sort of on an international level. Just curious in terms of, where Canada does sort of rank. Do you see sort of any factors in particular? I mean, I'm sure we can all brainstorm a few, but why, as it, for example, relates to Nordic countries, are there specific policies or education models or like infrastructure investments that Canada can learn from, I guess? Like, I'm just curious on your thoughts on that.
Yeah, those are good questions. I try to be careful. Those surveys are highly politicized. The overall results, like who ranks where and stuff like that. I think it's interesting when you drill down on a few things, like this gap thing, right? When you look at one jurisdiction, not in comparison to another jurisdiction, it's interesting that we're ranked 10th or somewhere in the middle or something like that. But the interesting thing is, I think, and that's why it's also good, I think, while we have a big sample size, so that Stats Canada can actually drill down and look at different populations and say, okay, here we have a population who is somewhat operates in the same system as another subpopulation, but the outcomes are different, and to use that as a starting point to say, well, we need to do something about it, right? And that could be about, let's say, rural populations or indigenous populations. Often I think they don't, indigenous, if I'm correct on this, but I think indigenous people on reserve don't participate in the survey, that only indigenous people off reserve, something like this. But things like that, right? Or for some countries, it flagged that especially second generation immigrant populations did worse than their mainstream counterpart. Not in Canada. In Canada, they did just as well. But in other countries, there was a huge gap in that. So if you drill down into those things, you get then closer, I think, to what you were asking for about what are those strategies. And you can look at, well, maybe it's the education system in other countries disadvantaging people with migration backgrounds, for example. Right? Or, stuff like that. And then work your way towards maybe high level and then strategies or something like that. So for that, I think it's useful, but for the comparison, it's very political. And I mean, there's no competition to have to be first, kind of thing. I think that's kind of, that makes it very difficult because you're not comparing the same systems.
Thank you for that. And I see, Lois, thank you for adding to the chat here in terms of the funding here. Yeah, we didn't get ongoing funding. Other funders may have covered ongoing communication
Fighting
costs.
loans, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, and ongoing funding. This is the thing, right? It's often project funding, it's often short-term funding, and I think we need to get to a point to say this is not a problem that will be resolved. It will continue. The stats show this. If it's something like the adult skills survey, it's it's a continuous problem that needs and there needs to be ongoing funding for to address these issues and not in the sense of, well, it's going to be in 10 years, or that it's just a matter of a new generation, which we now know too. I think that, for example, many young people are very good with social media. That doesn't correlate well with workplaces, unless you're in social media. But just as an example, right? Just because you grew up with technology does not mean and it's the same thing with literacy. There's growing evidence that, like reading and numeracy, I think a lot of us have the experience more with math, that if you don't practice your math, you lose it. Same with reading and writing, same with digital skills, not only because they change all the time or change so rapidly, but also because you need to continuously practice them and opportunities to do that. Great. I love the comments. I'm sorry I can't keep up with them, but I will save them.
Yeah, and I think, yeah, Lois just added to the chat as well that some funders are skeptical about benefits of internet-based information services. Even if people can access the info, lots of barriers to being able to actually use it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I have a comment here, Matthias, and then I think we have just a few minutes left, but you mentioned that ESL issues are a bigger factor than tech literacy. I heard on the way to work today that ESL programs in Alberta are being cut because of withdrawal of federal funding.
Yes. And that has to do with, absolutely. And that has to do with the lower IRCC's decision to have a lower to concentrate on integrating the people already in the country on temporary work permits and who are not permanent residents yet. And the fallacy there obviously is that just because they're already in the country doesn't mean that they don't need those services, right? But it's basically a cut in the program. Some of the programs were cut because the federal budget has been cut because of that. Yeah, very bad decision. But again, great. Well, thank you, Julie and Hannah.
Thank you so much. I know we're just a minute to go, but we're basically wrapped up here. I just wanted to say, first of all, thank you for joining us today, everyone. Huge thank you to Matthias for sharing such valuable insights with us. We've had some really great feedback in the chat, all mixed into folks' sort of brainstorming and suggestions and ideas here. So some really great comments so far for you, and we really appreciate it. I do want to say, if you've registered for our second session in the Digital Divide today, we'll see you right back at 1:45 Eastern Standard Time. So just a little bit of a 30-minute break here. If you haven't signed up yet, there's still time, so feel free to join us. But if you can't make it, we hope to see you on day 2 and day 3, so tomorrow and the day after, Wednesday and Thursday, for more great discussions. But otherwise, thank you, Julie. Thank you, Matthias. We really appreciate it. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Hannah. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Great to be here.
Thanks, Matthias. Thanks, Hannah.